What's up, Notjust developers? It's Friday, and that means that we are building a new application with React Native. Welcome back to a new live stream, and today we're gonna build the Books application in React Native. This is gonna be a tutorial for beginners, so it doesn't matter how much experience you have with React Native. I'm gonna help you build this application by the end of this video. So let's have a look at what exactly we're gonna do today. And yeah, the application that we're gonna build is inspired by the GoodReads application. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I'm using it always to track the books that I'm reading, and I enjoy it very much. And the application that we're gonna build will offer features like searching a book by the title or the author's ISBN or other information about the book. Then we will use different data sources to gather all of information about the books in order to present a complete set of books in the application. For this, we're going to use Google Books API and also the Open Library API to get information about the books. By the end of this video, we will also implement features like add books to your shelf or save books for reading them later. And also we would like to persist this data so that every time you open the application, we read it from the device storage and you have like your collection of books that you are reading. So, super excited about this project. It's quite simple, but the benefit of this project is that we're gonna use a lot of tools and technologies to build it. And I think this is a great opportunity for you to learn and diversify your knowledge when it comes to building mobile applications. So what exactly we're gonna use for today's build? We're gonna use React Native with Expo to build a mobile application because, of course, you know that this is the best way to build cross-platform mobile applications. We're gonna use Google Books API and also Open Library API to query the data for our that we will need in the application. We will use StepZen to build a GraphQL API using the Google Books and Open Library API. So in a moment, I'm going to show you how StepZen will help us simplify the whole architecture and the whole process of building this application. We're also going to use Apollo client because we will have a GraphQL API. So with Apollo client, we're going to query the data inside our React Native application from our GraphQL API. And this is going to be exciting because we have never used Apollo client in the live builds, but I teach this in our premium course. And I think that you will love the simplicity of Apollo when it comes to querying GraphQL APIs. At the end, we're also going to use Async Storage to write data and information to the device storage so that the next time you open the application, you will basically use the same data that you had before. And if you, at this moment, you feel a bit overwhelmed, don't worry, I got you covered. I made sure and I prepare like a step-by-step guide to make sure that you will be able to follow along with this project and to use all of these tools and technologies till the end. So yeah, this is, as I said, a beginner-friendly tutorial. However, if you have already some experience, I think you will not get bored because the pace of this tutorial is quite fast, but you will be able to pause and stop and follow the guide based on your own pace. So, and also we will build everything together here live, and there will be no like copy pasting and so on. So, got you covered, guys. If you're ready, I think we can get started. But before we get started, I want to share with you the step-by-step guide that I was mentioning. So you'll find the URL in the description of this video, or you can go to our notjust.dev blog and you should find the build a book application post there. So let me open it here. And this is the new way that I'm going to share the guides, because I think this is much easier for you compared to how I was sharing before. And yeah, I took this build to a completely new level, so you have everything that we will have to do here in this blog post with code snippets. So if something is not working for you, you can come back here and look and check what's the difference. So with that being said, let's scroll up till the top. And the next step before actually starting is to download the asset bundle. And the asset bundle you can get also from the guide. If you scroll down, here is the asset bundle. So download it from here and you will get a folder with, here is the asset bundle. So you should receive a folder with the PDF presentation that I have, with a guide, with a step-by-step guide in a PDF format, and also with a source code both for the application and for our StepZen. So all of this information is here and is going to help you move along this tutorial. All right. So with that being said, I think we can get started, right? I'm so sad that I don't have the intro here on my new PC, but yeah, I don't know. I can do the intro. Notjust.dev. Let's go. What was that, Vadim? Hello, everyone in the live chat. How are you doing, guys? Are you ready for a new build? I see so many people today. So excited about that. Rogelio, hello. You're always here. I appreciate that. I appreciate your support. Aditya as well. Always, never missing a live stream. Amazing project. Thank you very much. By the end of this, like you'll see that, yeah, it's indeed an exciting project that will teach us a lot of stuff. Next, okay, let's go. I see a lot of recommendations and suggestions for the project. So if someone from our team can take notes of the ideas that we receive, I would highly appreciate that. Hello guys, I see you. Divi, Kimboa, hello, Manu. Love your content. Thank you very much. We're putting a lot of work into this, and I think it's the time to mention that if you're enjoying what we are doing here at notjust.dev, then consider subscribing to the channel down below and hitting a like button. Share our tutorials with your network, and maybe we will be able to help your friends or your colleagues from work. And yeah, that would mean everything to us. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate all your support. Is it Expo? Yes, we are going to use Expo. But I don't know, you don't have to be afraid of Expo because it literally makes it easier for you to build React Native applications. So I think we can get started, but yeah, again, before that, one last step, I want to cover a bit of the architecture and how we're gonna build this application, how we're gonna design it from a high level, how we're going to bring the data from multiple APIs in our application, and how we're going to manage everything. So starting with our data sources, as I said, we're going to use Google Books API and also the Open Library API. These are one of the most popular APIs for books. If you want, you can integrate others as well, and this tutorial will allow you to do that without a lot of extra effort. And yeah, having these two separate APIs, we want to use, first of all, why we want to use two of them. We want to use two of them in order to have a more complete data set of books in our application. And if some information is missing on the Google Books API, that information might be available on the Open Library. And that's the same with different types of books. Some of them are available on Open Library, and not available on Google Books, and so on. So there are a lot of use cases when you would like to consume multiple data sources in order to have a complete data set. Not only books, but in a lot of applications you have that. So how do we get this information in our application to display? Well, from our application, we can query the Books API and the Open Library API, because these are REST API and it's a simple URL, and when we query them, it returns us a JSON with all the books, for example, that we have queried. But here is the first problem that this architecture introduces. As you can see from our mobile application, basically from our client, we are interacting with multiple data sources. And if at this moment it's still going to be manageable, you're going to have some if statements to see if you're getting the information from Google API or from Open Library. You're going to have to manage them differently. Authentication, you have to manage separately and so on. But it's still probably manageable at some point. But imagine if we have like a lot of data sources, APIs that we have to query. Then it quickly becomes unmanageable to query and to manage all of this data from your client side. Another problem is that these APIs are REST API, and the problem with REST APIs is that they will throw at you literally all the data that we know about something. So if we are querying the books, as you can see here on this screen, they will, for every book, there will be like a lot of data, everything that we know. And in a small application where we only need like the image and the title of the book, why do we need all of that data? It becomes very inefficient to query it. It becomes, the queries itself becomes large and take a lot of time. So, how can we solve these two problems? The first one, having to query two separate APIs from our client side, and the second one, having to work with a REST API. Well, to solve that problem, we're going to introduce StepZen in the middle of our architecture. And how that will help StepZen, using StepZen, we're going to be able to create a GraphQL API that will connect to Google Books API and also to Open Library API. But in this situation, now from our client, we have to interact with only one API, which is the StepZen API. So now our client will be, from our client, it's going to be much more easier to manage the data. We're also going to work with a GraphQL API instead of a REST API, and it's going to improve the speed of our queries, because we will query specifically the fields that we need to render in the application. That's actually why I love so much GraphQL. So as you can see, StepZen allows us to connect to different REST APIs, and based on that, create a GraphQL API. We can connect to REST APIs, SOAP API, OData, and other NoSQL backends as well. Besides this, we can also connect to GraphQL backends. So for example, if we wanted to connect to the third API, for example, I don't know, Open Weather API that offers a GraphQL API, then we can connect from StepZen there, and from our application, we simply get the data from StepZen. Besides the GraphQL API, we can also connect to SQL backends, and if you have like a .SQL database, we can connect it right away to the StepZen. So as you can see, StepZen is sponsoring this video, this tutorial, so thank you very much for that. Throughout this video, you will see how easy StepZen makes working with multiple sources of data and how easy it is to create GraphQL in the cloud. So to recap everything that I was saying about how StepZen can help us, it helps us build declaratively GraphQL API from backend building blocks. And the backend building blocks here can be databases, they can be REST APIs, or they can even be other GraphQL APIs. So as you can see here on the left, we put everything together, and then we get this StepZen API built from different blocks. Another approach, another benefit of StepZen is that it allows us to build federated APIs from different GraphQL building blocks. So as you can see here, the building blocks are actual GraphQL APIs that are merged together into one single source of truth that you can query from your application. This is very beneficial when you have like microservices and a lot of your data is scattered around. So thanks StepZen once again for sponsoring this video and for making it possible. And I hope you guys will enjoy it as much as I enjoyed preparing this tutorial and working with StepZen. Now, I think we can get back to our guide and get started building the application. Now that we know how we're going to build the architecture, how everything is going to be connected, let's go back to our guide, and let me actually paste it in the guide is going to be here. Let me zoom in a bit like this, and I'm going to paste it in the chat for people to have access to it. Okay. So if we scroll down a bit, here we have creating a GraphQL API in a minute. So let's get started with our first step. We have around 20 steps until the end of the tutorial, so we should be good to go in a relatively short amount of time. So let's start our process by creating a StepZen account, pressing here. So let's go here. StepZen, by the way, offers free plans, so you can sign up without a credit card for free. So let's go here to the login page. Let's press sign up, and I'm gonna sign up with a new account. Let's click sign up. You can also sign up with GitHub if that's easier for you. And I think I'm gonna do it like this. Give me 1 second to arrange all my windows so that you can see properly. I think this is good. So let's go to the dashboard. Let's press on the dashboard in the top bar there. And we see that we do not have any endpoints deployed yet. Okay, that's until this moment. Let's press get started and start building our GraphQL API. Back in our tutorial, but actually also here as well, the first step we need to do is to install StepZen CLI. So for that, let's copy this npm install -g StepZen, and let's open a terminal. I'm gonna zoom in like this, and let's install StepZen globally. Come on, should be done. Once that is done, the next step is to log in using our CLI to our account. So for that, let's copy this command from here, and let's paste it here in our terminal to StepZen login -a, and this should be your login username. So it asks us what is our admin key. Copy it from here, paste it here, and we have successfully logged in with this account. Perfect, that's everything that we needed to do at this moment. The next step is to build our GraphQL API using different sources that we might have. Here we can see all the options that StepZen offers us by default. So for example, we can connect to an SQL database, to a NoSQL database. What we're interested in is we want to connect to a REST API. For that, if we go back to our guide, I already have prepared the command that will help you import the Google API. And from the StepZen perspective, what we have to do is to use the command StepZen import curl. And the curl is the command that allows you to make requests. So for example, without StepZen, if you simply do curl Google APIs, this URL for the Google APIs, asking for Harry Potter, if I do that, then we see the response from the API. As you can see here, yeah. It's basically the same as you would open this URL here. Don't know why didn't found, but in our console it was working. So what we have to do now is using StepZen to import Google APIs and to build an endpoint using that. So let's copy this code from here, and in our actually before using StepZen import, I want to go to a folder that will be specifically for our project. So I'm gonna do projects, YouTube. Okay, and here let's make a dir. Let's make the new directory that will hold the our projects for today. So let's do books project. Books project, cd books project. And here, actually, I will, if I do ls, we don't have anything, I will create one more directory for our StepZen API. So StepZen, let's make this directory and let's go inside StepZen. Now, when you are in the StepZen folder, let's go ahead and import Google API. So import Google API, the first step. Copy it. Let's go here and let's press enter. It has other parameters like the query name that it's going to generate, also the query type, the prefix in order not to collide with others. Here it asks us what would you like to call our endpoint. I'm going to go with a default one that they suggest, and we see that successfully imported schema curl from StepZen. That means that something worked. So at this moment, we're not gonna test it because we can go ahead and import the open library as well. And in a moment, we're gonna start the server and see what we have so far. So now let's copy the second command to import our open library API. So let's go back here and do StepZen import for the open library. And in a couple of seconds, very fast, like impressively fast, StepZen generated the GraphQL API for us. If you're interested what's happening in your project, you can have a look at this by opening this directory using Visual Studio Code or any other editor of choice. So if you're gonna look here, you're gonna see that what we have is an index GraphQL entry point that simply references two other APIs, the Google Books API and the Open Library API. Then we have two folders for these two APIs, the Google Books and the Open Library. And if we look in the index of the Google Books, we see here all the queries, all the types, everything that was parsed and generated for us by StepZen. Simply by looking at by doing a curl request to an API, StepZen is smart enough to deduct types out of a response that is coming in JSON and create our API, GraphQL API like this. And what we have here is the Google Books search query. All right, that's everything that I wanted to show you here. We can close it because we're not going to have to work with files directly at this moment. But what we want to do is to actually run our GraphQL API and try to play around with it. To do that, we're going to do StepZen start, press enter. And the first step, StepZen will deploy our API to StepZen backend. And then we see that everything successfully, it took only 2.4 seconds. And what I'm interested in is in this line that is barely visible that says explore with graphical. Let's go ahead and explore with graphical by pressing on this local host. I'm holding command. I think on Windows you should hold control in order to be able to press on a link here, or you can simply copy it like this and paste it in a new in the browser here. So going here, nothing to see, but if we press on the Explore, we see right away to I'm gonna do it like this probably. We right away here in the left side Give me 1 second. I don't really like that my screen is a bit like this should be. I should see better. So as I was saying, we have two queries here. So if we open the Google query, we can, by providing two parameters here, the country, which is actually required for Google API, and you should provide the country where you live. And the query is going to be the actual query that we want to search based on. After we provide the variables, we can open these items here and select what information do we want back. For example, let's take the ID of a book, and from the volume info, there is the authors, there is title, subtitle, for example. And yeah, let's leave it like this at this moment, and let's simply press play. And this will run our GraphQL API, and we're gonna receive our items here. And as we can see, learning React Native for mobile development, learning React Native, and so on, because we are searching for React Native books. If you'd search React.js, then you will see React.js by example, and so on. So our API is working, our API is ready. And the next step would be to actually consume this API from our application. That was quite easy. I prepared here actually a proper query that we're gonna use. So you can come to the guide and copy this query from here, because it contains the fields that we are gonna need, and also it works based on the variables. As you can see here, the query parameter is a variable. And now, because it is a variable, that is sent both to the Google search and to the Open Library search, we can go here in the query variables and provide the variable Q that we want to search based on. So if I'm gonna do React Native, and if I'm gonna play or run, we see right away the books starting from here, like Google Book Search. And if I'm gonna scroll down, or if I'm gonna close the Google Book Search, after that we see the Open Library search that has the docs with author name, with title, ISBN, and so on. So this is the query that we're gonna need to power our application search engine for the books. I think we are done here. And we can move to the mobile application. How easy was that? Localhost URL needs to be opened. My API is returning missing, unauthorized, missing or not allowed. Missing or not allowed. When do you get that error? When you're trying to open the localhost? Because if you're trying to open this green one, then let me show you. Because yeah, I think I know what is the problem that you encounter. If you try to open the other URL, the green URL, then you're gonna see this for one unauthorized, missing, or not allowed. Because do it like this, because this URL is our API URL and it actually needs authorization. So we're gonna cover that in a moment, and I'm gonna show you how we can query our actual backend URL by passing the authorization key in order not to get that. But if you take the localhost with the graphical, then you're not gonna need to authenticate. Everything should work fine. All right, so as I was saying, let's move on to our mobile application, and let's start by setting up a new application using Expo. For that, again, let's go into the terminal. I'm going to actually leave this terminal open, and I'm going to open a new one. Let's do a new window here. So I'm going to move away my backend, leaving it open. because we're gonna have to interact with it. So don't close it at this moment. Just open a new terminal. Let's go into the project, into the folder that we created for our project. So YouTube StepZen should be somewhere here. CD books project. Let's go into the project folder. And if I do ls here, I should see that we have a StepZen directory. So alongside the StepZen, as in the same directory as the StepZen is in, let's go ahead and initialize our React Native application. For that, I'm gonna go ahead and take this command npx create expo app, books mobile, and with a template tabs. Let's paste it here. It's quite important to go with the template tabs because this template will come with some pre-installed libraries that I'm not going to show you how to install in this tutorial, but we're going to simply use them. Some of these libraries are navigation, so we're going to see how to work with them, but we're not going to go through the installation guide because they are provided by this template. This live stream is awesome. Let's go. StepZen is here. I didn't see that. Hello, guys. So far, it's really easy to build things with StepZen. We are 30 minutes in, from which 15 minutes probably was the introduction, and we're already finished with setting up and creating our GraphQL API, which is amazing. So now we're waiting for our mobile application to initialize using Expo. That usually takes up to 2 or 3 minutes, and then we're gonna be able to get started. Guys, how do you feel so far? How is it going? Are you following along? That's what I'm interested. Or you prefer to watch now and build it later? Because if you just watch, we are not friends. You need to actually build, you need to actually follow along and try it yourself, because that's the best way you will actually learn all of this stuff. So going back to the screen, we see that our application is ready. So what we can do is we should open our React Native application that we just generated using Visual Studio Code. And for that, I'm gonna write code, and I'm gonna provide the books mobile to open that directory using Visual Studio Code. If this command doesn't work for you, you can simply open Visual Studio Code manually. And from open here, navigate to the books mobile folder project and open it this way. So we have our VS Code here, our application is open, but before we go and look into the folders and files that we have here, let's go ahead and actually run this application to see what we have. To do that, I'm gonna do npm start. This will start our development server. And from here, we can press I to open the application on an iOS device, or A to open it on an Android emulator. And if you don't have the native side set up, for example, Xcode or Android Studio on your system, then you still can test this application by simply downloading the Expo Go application from the market, both on Android and on iOS, and scan this QR code to run it on your basically physical device in your hand. I have my emulator here, so I'm gonna use it from here. And we should see the application. Could not paste in the StepZen query because of page break in PDF. I would suggest you follow the step-by-step guide, not from the PDF, but from the notjust.dev website. the URL you can find in the description of this video. And here, when you're gonna copy it, it's gonna be copied correctly with the right new lines. All right, so we have our application. It is here. Yeah, let's first of all have a look at what folders, what files do we have, and what we are working with. First of all, the entry point in our application is our app.tsx, and here is where everything starts. And as we can see, this is what is rendered on the screen. So at this moment, we are rendering a navigation object that is imported from our navigation folder. Okay, navigation is the next folder that we're gonna look at. We can find it here in the root directory as navigation. And in the index.ts, here is a lot of code. If you don't understand it at this moment, don't worry, we're not gonna have to work a lot with this code. But what this does is basically it creates a bottom tab navigator, which you can see here on the bottom of the screen. And I'm gonna have to make this a bit smaller so you can see it as well, like this. This is tab 1. And as you can see, the tab 1 renders this component, tab 1 screen. And tab 2, if we scroll down, this is the tab 2, and it renders the component tab 2 screen. So we can move from tab 1 to tab 2. Okay, as we saw, our screens are in the screen directory, and here we have these two screens that we're interested in, tab 1 screen and tab 2 screen. If we go into the tab 1 screen and, for example, remove this edit screen info, remove this separator, and for the title say hello world, without rerunning the application, without anything, we see the application hot reloading and showing us the hello world text that we're displaying here. And at this moment, I think we will not need this navigation, so we can remove this like this. So we have a clean screen that we can work with. Before moving forward, I think I wanted to adjust the tint color. So let me copy this tint color from here, and I'm going to show you where we can adjust it. We have a folder called constants, and here we have colors. In this file, we are keeping track of the colors for our application. So one of the colors is this tint color, that is the main color of application. So let me go ahead and change it to a green to, yeah, because that's how GoodReads is working. So now we can see that the color of our links or the color of our icons is this green color that we set here. Perfect. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do git add git commit -m initialize expo application. Let's do it like this, so that later I can provide you also with commit history, so you can see like all the changes that we do at every single step. Our next step is to get started with Apollo client. And as I said before, we're going to use Apollo client to query our StepZen GraphQL API. So we have here an API we need to query in our application. So for that, we will use Apollo client. To install and set up Apollo client, we can follow the guide on their website, the documentation, but I have summed up all of the steps that we have to do here in our guide on notjust.dev. So let's go ahead and start with npx expo install Apollo client and also GraphQL. Copy that command, come to our React Native application, and let's install it in the terminal like this, npx expo install Apollo client and GraphQL. Hi Yusuf, hi Dano, hello everyone who is joining. Super excited. For everyone who is joining, let me in 2 seconds give you an overview of what we're doing today. Give me 20 seconds. So today we're gonna build an application with React Native. The application is a React Native books application that will allow us to keep track of the books that we are reading. It will allow us also to search books using multiple data sources like Google Books API and Open Library API. And this application was built inspired by the GoodReads, if you know that application. So we're gonna have features like adding the books to the read shelf, persisting the data on the device storage, and other interesting stuff that we will do during this tutorial. So far, we have managed to create our API thanks to StepZen, and using StepZen, we generated the GraphQL API that was created and that allows us to connect to the Google Books API and also to the Open Library API. So now now our goal is to install Apollo client in our mobile application, and using Apollo client, query our GraphQL API generated by StepZen. This is the next step, and let's get to it. Quick review from 1 to 6. Yeah, we just did that. Now we are on step 9. We installed the Apollo client, and we can go ahead and set up Apollo inside our application. Let me see what we're gonna need there. Because the things that are important for you to remember, I'm not gonna copy paste, I'm gonna write them. And the things that you don't have to remember, we're just gonna copy paste them. All right, so let's go ahead in the... The next step is we installed our Apollo client, and the next step is to set up Apollo client to be able to connect to our GraphQL API, to our endpoint, and this will allow us later on to run queries. We want to set up our Apollo client as soon as possible, so that's why we're going to do that in the app.tsx. We're going to do it here. So the first step here is we need to initialize a client. And the client is going to be an Apollo client that we will import like this. Import. Oh, sorry. Now it's better. Import Apollo client from Apollo client. Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and initialize our client. Const client equal Apollo client equal new Apollo client. And here we need to provide the options how we want to set up our Apollo client. One of the most important properties here is the URI, and this will tell us like basically what is the endpoint URI of our GraphQL. Here, what we have to do is from the terminal where we started StepZen, which for me is this one, we need to take, let me do it like this. We need to take the green API, our API URL. That one that I showed you that it will give you an unauthorized or missing error. Let's paste this URI here. Or actually, let me show you how to do it first without any authorization. So let me try to show you how to do it using simply the URI, the localhost URI. I haven't tried that, but that is going to be a bit simpler because we're not going to have to work with authentication. So if I copy HTTP localhost API from here, you know what? Let me show you right away how to do it properly without doing shortcuts. So ignore what I said in the previous step. What we have to do is we have to actually take the green URI that we see here in our StepZen console, Basically your API URL is this one. Let's copy it from here. Let's add it here. And if you remember, like if we access this one, we get for one unauthorized. And why is that? Because we have to provide some headers, some authorization headers. And we provide headers by specifying here headers, and we will provide the default headers that Apollo will apply to every single request that it will make. So what header we want? We want the authorization header, and the authorization header will be in this form. It will be API key, and here we need the actual API key, like this. What's happening with this one? Argument of type URI headers. Okay, cache. Okay, this is our authorization. We are not done yet because we need to provide the cache mechanism. Apollo will not only query the GraphQL data, but it will also cache it locally. It will cache it in order for it to improve the performance of your application. So if you send the same request 2 times in a row, the first one is going to go to the server, but the second time is going to see that it is cached locally, so it will be much more performant this way. So we need to provide the cache mechanism for Apollo client, and the default cache mechanism that we will provide is called in-memory cache. And let's do here new in-memory cache. We imported it also from Apollo client, in-memory cache, like this. Okay, we're almost done. We have to actually provide our API key. So in the guide, if we look, I showed you how you can get your API key. So run this StepZen whoiam -- API key, and this command will show you the API key of your application. So in a different terminal, or even in here, let me try to do it here. StepZen whoiam API key, and right away we see my API key. Don't worry, I'm gonna delete it after the live stream, so don't even try it. Once you see the API key, let's go ahead and store this in a variable above our client. So API key is equal to our API key. Now we can go ahead and replace this one with the variable API key. Should be good. So double check the syntax, or simply copy paste it from here, initializing Apollo client. All right, so the last step is to use the Apollo provider, which is a higher order component, Apollo provider, which is a higher order component that we have to encapsulate our whole application with it, with this Apollo provider. So let's go ahead and encapsulate our navigation with Apollo provider, not client, Apollo provider. Let's put the navigation inside Apollo provider, and we need to provide here the client that we just initialized. Client. Okay. If we refresh the application and we don't see any errors, that means that so far everything is good. Now, to actually understand if we have initialized correctly our Apollo client and if we are allowed to do some queries, let's move on and implement our first query. Before that, I think I'm gonna git add everything, install and set up Apollo client. Okay. So based on our guide, the next step, the 11th step, is to query our books inside our tab 1 screen. So if you remember, we already have worked with this query. So let's go ahead and copy this query from here. And we will need it inside our screens, tab 1 screen. At the top here, let's go ahead and add our query. And also make sure to import GraphQL from Apollo client. I will delete the things that I don't need, for example, root tab, screen props, or edit. I don't need those. Okay, so having this query, we will need to run it. And to run a query, Apollo has a hook called useQuery. And using this hook, we will go into our component, in the body of our component here. And we're going to say const, we're going to get something from the useQuery hook. And the useQuery hook expects an actual query object. So this query that we just defined here, this GraphQL query, we're going to send it here. And also it expects some options. One of the options that we are interested in is in the variables, because if you remember from our graphical here, we have provided this Q variable that will be passed to our query. So that's the same thing that we have to do here. Variables, then an object with the Q field, and the value will be what we want to search. For example, React Native. Okay, React Native like this. Now, useQuery will give us back three fields. I mean, three fields that we are interested in at this moment. It will return us data, it will return us loading, and it will return us error. And all of them, basically, the first time when we run this query, loading will be true. And if the query fails to succeed, then we're going to get an error and we're going to see the error. Otherwise, we're going to get the data and we're going to be able to loop through the data and see what we have. So let's go ahead and right away do console log data. But for the data, it's going to be a lot of data, so we can do JSON but it doesn't matter because we know the structure of the data, where we can look in the graphical. Loading, and let's do console log error. Let's open the terminal where we have our Expo server running. It should be here. And if I'm gonna refresh the application, we see undefined, true, undefined, and these are the first three console logs. If we see what we are console logging, we're console logging data, loading, error. And that means that data is undefined, loading is true, and error is undefined. The second time we console log this, basically when we receive some data, our component will re-render, and we see that the first console log is already filled with data, with Google Book search and also with the open library root here. And the loading is false because we already received the answer and the error is undefined. If we're not going to provide any query variable here, we should see an error, connection HTTP error bad request. This bad request means that we didn't provide any query. And we saw that it's happening there. Okay, so what we're going to do here, let's show some user feedback on the screen of what's happening with our data. Because it might take some time to load the data, and it's better to give users some visual feedback. So I'm going to go inside our container here, and I'm going to conditionally render some components. For example, if loading is true, I'll do and. I'm going to render an activity indicator. The activity indicator for me was automatically imported from React Native, or you can import it manually. So now if I'm going to refresh, I will see the loading spinner for a couple of seconds, and after that it will disappear. You see, that's what I was talking about. Now I'm gonna do the same with the error. Basically, if error is defined, then I'm gonna actually display something a bit more complex. Probably I'm gonna have a view and a couple of texts. Come on, view. And inside this view, I want to have a text. The text will say error fetching books. And I also want to provide the actual error message for more details of what happened. So let's do error.message. I don't think I need this view here. I can leave it like this. And let's try to trigger an error by providing an empty string to the query. And we see error fetching books, connector, HTTP error bad request. Perfect. Now we don't need this text message because we will have to render something else there. And if I refresh, you see at the beginning the spinning indicator, which very fast disappears, and we see then error fetching the books. Okay, that's good. We have data loading error. Let's have a look in our guide to see what's our next step. So to summarize, we define the GraphQL query that we want to run. Then using the use query hook imported from Apollo, we are running this query with these variables. And we get back in return 3 properties: data, loading, and error. With the data, we can simply display it on the screen. With the error, we also display it on the screen if it happens. And the data we will render it in the next step. So speaking about rendering, let me query books. So our next step. Our next step is to go ahead and actually render some books on the screen. And we're going to do that based on the data that we receive. But if we check here in our graphical, the data structure is basically different for Google Books and is different from the Open Library Search. I'm talking here about like the property names and so on. So for example, if in Google Books we have offers, then in Open Library Search we have offer name. If here we have like thumbnail, here we have cover edition key. So as you can see, like the data itself is there, but it's in a different shape. What we want to do is we want to have a unique way of how we want to represent a book inside our application. And we will map the response that we get from the API to that specific type that we will define now and that we basically control. So for that, let's go ahead and define this type. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file, book, in the root directory of our project. Let's do create new file. And let's call it book.d.ts. This is a definition file that allows us to define global types. So our type will be a book type. And what information do we need about this type? Most probably it's going to have an ID. Not sure if we need it, but yeah, let's go with an image. That's going to be a string because it's a URL. And here we need Besides the image, it will definitely have a title, and the title is also string. It will have offers, and the offers both in Google API and in the open library, this is an array of strings because a book can have multiple offers. And ISBN, we're gonna have it as a string, and even though the same books can have multiple ISBN, we're gonna store only one of them for now, just to make things simpler. Okay, now that we have this book, our next step is to create a component that will render one book on the screen. So let's go ahead in our components folder and let's create a new file called bookitem.tsx. In this book item, I was not planning to go into the details of how to design it because it's not the purpose of today's video. What we can do is we can take the code for the book item from our guide, and it's basically it's quite a simple component, but we're gonna spend like around 10 to 15 minutes if we have to recreate it right now. So let's take the code here, and I'm gonna, when we see it on the screen, I'm gonna come back and explain like the code that we have here. But yeah, it's pretty simple. The book item will receive one book that we just defined like this. It will receive one book as a property, and based on this book, it will render the image, it will also render the title, and it will simply render the offers below the title. And then we have our styles for this component. Okay, what we can do with this book item component is we can go back to our screens, tab 1 screen, where we have this data, and we need to render a flat list of items. So let's go ahead and import a flat list. A flat list is a component that allows us to render vertically and horizontally scrollable list in React Native. So it works like this. We have an array of data. We know how to render every single item in that array. So we put them together and render a list of them, which is scrollable and quite performant. So let's go ahead and render a flat list here below the loading and the error. So flat list. I'm gonna close this component right away because it doesn't need any children, but it needs two required properties. One of the required properties is the data, basically the array of the items that we want to render. If we look at the console log of this data that we receive from the use query, if I'm gonna find it somewhere, should be here. We see this one is the object. We see that the data is an object containing Google Book Search, and the Google Book Search is an object containing items. So this is the array that we are targeting. Let's do that like this. Data. If data, I'm gonna access the Google Book Search safely with a question mark because data can be undefined when we just open the application. Then, as I said, it has the items there. So let's do it like this. And also let's provide a default value if our data is undefined. We simply want an empty array there instead of having undefined. Now that we have this data, we need the second required property for the flat list. And this property is called render item, which is a function, which here is the property. This property is a function that should return some JSX that will be rendered for every single element in this array. The render item function will receive some parameters, and one of them is the item itself that we should destructure. So the item will be one item from this array, one book from Google Books Search. So what we should do here is for every item, we need to render a book item component that we just created in our components. So this is the book item in the tab 1 screen. Make sure to import it. Import book item from components. And after that, we render it here. But it says that it doesn't comply with the type because we didn't provide the book. Yeah, because we need to provide it here. So the book, our book, you would expect we can send the item there, but that's not gonna properly work because the book is of type book that has image, title, offers, and ISBN. So let's go ahead and define this object here with image equals something, title equals something, offers equals with an array, and the ISBN equals something. So if I save this right now, whoa, where are you? I wanted to do it like this. Okay, so now let's figure out how do we get the image from the item. And for that we're gonna go into our GraphQL here, and we can see that for every item this is the structure of an object. So to get, for example, the title, which is here, we need to go into the volume info, then title. So let's do just that. For example, title equal item dot volume info dot title. For the offers, that's gonna be the same, item dot volume info dot offers. So item dot volume info dot offers. For the ISBN, if we check here, the ISBN is a bit more tricky because it's an array of ISBNs. So we're gonna simply take the first one most probably, but this is Open Library Search, and this is the Google search. The Google search for ISBN has an array of objects where every object has an identifier and a type. So for this moment, I'm gonna say that it's the item dot volume info dot ISBN, not ISBN, industry identifiers at position 0 dot the actual identifier. So we take the first object and then we access the identifier itself. And lastly, we have image. We see that we need to go into the volume info, image links, and then thumbnail. So it's item.volume info dot images or image links dot thumbnail. And with this information here, we are basically parsing the data that we receive from the API to a book that we defined the structure ourselves. Let's go ahead in our variables and provide actually React Native save, and it's not working. Google Book search. Let's see. I'm gonna delete the console log data error and loading, only the data. So what's going on there? Google search has items. Google search. Oh, it's items here in the data flat list. I had a mistake. I wrote item instead of items. And here I define is not an object evaluating item, volume, info, image link, thumbnails. Image link can be null. Some books can have missing thumbnails, images. So let's put a question mark here after the image link to safely access the thumbnail only if it exists. And now let's cross our fingers and see. Now let's refresh once. Might be something with our styles, because let me go ahead in the book item here and let me do console log hello, and here I'm gonna do even the book. So yeah, we are actually going there, we are rendering, but the problem is with our in the tab 1 screen. If I'm gonna go to the container, what's up with this container? Background color blue. Okay, it's there. I'm gonna delete the line items and justify content. Yes, we need for this container only flex 1. And just like that, we have our application. Here we see a list of books. We see the title and we see the author of these books. I'm not sure why we don't see the image links, because I had a yes, again I had one error mistake here. What I want to do is to give some spacing to this container, so I'm gonna add a padding 10 here, and now it looks much better. And lastly, I want to get rid of the scroll bar indicator on the right, and we can do that with flat list by providing a property here called shows vertical scroll indicator false. And now it's hidden and it looks much better. So here we see all the books. I mean, not all the books, like the first page of the books related to React Native from Google Books API. We're not done yet, like we still have to merge and to have like 2 tabs, one with Google API, one with open library. Also, we will implement like the searching with an input field. And lastly, we will do like saving the books in your storage and managing your list. But so far, I think we are doing pretty good and we have made a lot of progress for our application. What I want to do is I want to double check with a guide if we have everything done correctly. I think we should be good to go here. Yeah. Our next step would be to work with the input box. All right, guys, so how is it going for you so far? Are you managing to follow along and to build it at the same time? That's what I'm interested in. Hi from Benin. Hello. Done at my end. Awesome. That's so nice. Yang is saying, Vadim, you are the best and I never get the chance to catch one of your streams, but your Uber Eat clone got me a job, and brother, words can't explain how grateful I am. Thank you indefinitely. Oh my God, that's such a nice message. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us. And I'm so happy that some of our work that we're doing was helpful for you and you got a job with that project. I'm so impressed. Congratulations and good luck with your new job. Cannot query field open library search on type query. Cannot query field open library search on type query. Have you imported properly without any errors the step 2, importing the open library API? And if yes, open the in the StepZen here, you can have a look. So this is our books project. So in the StepZen folder that we have created right now, you can have a look at our, for example, index GraphQL here. Open it somewhere and have a look. Make sure that you have the second part here, open library index GraphQL. And if you, I was not sharing. So I was showing you from the StepZen directory, you can check out this index GraphQL file and make sure that you have this second parameter open library. And the second step to check is in the open library, in the index.graphql, scroll down and see the query here and make sure that the name is the same, open library search. This is what allows us to run this query. Nice background design. Thank you very much. Still a work in progress. We're gonna add more things there. The first time for me that I watch it live. Awesome, I see a lot of people watching it for the first time live. Guys, if you enjoyed what we're doing here and notjust.dev, and if you learn something new today or learn something new from the tutorials that we are doing, then please subscribe to our channel, share our tutorials with your network, and let's help us spread the word and spread these tutorials to more developers out there. Thank you very much. I truly appreciate that. And now I think we can go back to our project, and let me check what's up here. So I think we can add everything. Git commit rendering books list. Rendering books list. Perfect. Oh, we see one more exciting comment here from Uvir. Your project that implement maps allowed me to create an app that tackles gender-based violence in South Africa, which is a huge issue the country is facing. Just wanted to say thank you. Oh my God, that's so exciting to see projects that are solving like real problems out there. And yeah, I'm excited and I'm happy that our tutorials helped you build that application. And speaking about building projects that solve real project, actually, let me announce the hackathon that we're doing next week. So if you haven't heard already, we are organizing a 3 days hackathon starting from next Friday all the way till the it's basically 25th, 26th, and 27th. We have a long weekend where we will all build our own applications. It's gonna be, we're gonna provide a lot of workshops that will help you build that application. Also, we have a lot of prizes where you'll be able to compete at the end, at the demo day. So I'm super excited about that. Check it out on our website by going to notjust.dev/hack. And you'll find more information there and how you can sign up for the hackathon and compete for our prizes. We have free teams that will win $500 and other free teams that will win $250. So yeah, if you have any idea or if you want to join some other teams, then definitely sign up. And I promise you that you'll learn a ton out of that event as well. Dico, thank you very much. We are working for that. We are working. Regarding the question about the hackathon, I'm not going to be able to answer all of them right now, but sure, like ask them under the videos that we post or directly to social media to me. Should the video of a project review contain my face? That's I'm gonna come back with requirements, but at this moment I would say that no, it's not a requirement. All right, so let's go back to coding and building, because our next step, based on our guide from notjust.dev, is to where? We are at step 11. No, we've done 11. We have created the 12th, 13th, 14th is done, and we are at the step 15th. So our goal right now is to add an input box and to actually query the query based on the input that the user writes, not based on a dummy input here, React Native. So what do we have to do for that? To render text input, first of all, we're gonna import text input from React Native, and we are doing this also in the tab 1 screen, on this screen. So having the text input imported, let's go here, and I think we're going to render it where? After the loading? Yes, after the loading, because we want the loading to be displayed below the text input. So let's start with a view that will contain our text input and also a button. And that view will have a style called, I don't know, header. Then inside this view, let's put the text input. Text input like this. And what do we have to do there? First of all, let's provide a placeholder because that's the easiest way to be able to see the text input on the screen. Because right now it's there, but we cannot see it. So the placeholder can be search, and we right away see the search here. So if you start typing, it works as expected. But that's not everything that we need. So let's provide a style to our text input. And using the styles, we're gonna adjust a bit how we display it. The styles is gonna be input. And lastly, after the text input, we're gonna have a button that we will import from React Native, and the title of this button can be search. Make sure to import this button from React Native here. Okay, so we see the text input, we see the button underneath. Let's go ahead and style our component. So what do we have there? We have a header. One second. So we have a header, we have input, and that's it. Because we want to render them in the same row, for the header component, I will say that the flex direction should be row. Now this puts them in the same row. Then what do we have to do for the input? I think we're gonna do a flex 1 to make sure that the input itself will take all the available space and will leave for the button the necessary space. Okay, what else? What else? Now let's try to style the input box itself. So for example, let's provide a border to this input. So border width will be 1, and the border color can be a color called Gainsborough. That is a very, very light gray. Yes, that works for us. And to make the corners a bit round, let's do border radius 5, and this will round up the corners of our box, of our input. What I want to do is to provide more spacing inside, because right now the search kind of touches the border. So for this, I'm gonna do a padding of 10. Padding of 10. Yes, that actually works. And another thing is to give some margin vertical to this component to have basically some room to breathe, not to touch the upper and the lower components. Yes, I think that's everything that I wanted for this one here. Lastly, one small thing, we can say align items center on the header in order for our button to be horizontally aligned with our text box, because without it, like, it looks a bit, it's to the top. So like this, it's in the center. Okay. So we have our input style, we have our search button, everything looks good. By the way, on Android, the button will look a bit different, and that's expected. That's how buttons work natively on the device. Lastly, what I want to do is, whenever we will press on this button, we need to know what is the value of a text input. At the moment, there is no way we can track the value of a text input because we are not, we're not tracking it. In order to keep track of the value that the user writes in the text input, we need a state variable for that. So the state variable for this is going to be called search, and set search here is equal use state, and initially let's do empty string. This is the default value. Now, having our state variable search, we can send it as a value to our text input, value search. And now if I'm gonna change the search here to hello world, and if I'm gonna save, right away in that text input we see hello world. But the problem is that if I'm gonna try to change it, it actually resets to the hello world, because we are never updating our state variable, and it's always hello world. When should we update it? We should update the state variable when the text input changes. So we can provide a callback function on change text, and this callback function will call the set search using the new text that the user writes there. And now if I'm gonna write, it's updating properly, and we have this value in the search state here. By the way, use state was imported from React like this. And I like to keep it as the first one. I don't know why, but makes more sense. And I'm gonna remove a hello world from here. Like this, it's better. So we have search, okay. Now what we can do is we can take this search parameter and we can provide to the query in the use query variables. So if I provide here the search field, initially we have bad requests because we don't have anything there. But if I'm gonna do React Native, come on, React, then we see books on React. And if I'm gonna do React Native, we see books on React Native. All right, so we see that it's working. The problem with this approach at the moment is that whenever we change the search, basically whenever we write one letter, then what's going on here? Let me fix this one and then explain. Item volume info industry identifiers can be null, so let's access the position 0 also safely like this, and the identifier also safely like this. It was at React N, right? Yes. Okay, so as I was saying, the problem with the current approach that we have now is that whenever we change at least one letter, we do another query, another request to the backend. This is not very optimal for this use case because we're gonna send like a lot of requests. Usually in this situation, we tend to throttle the event of querying based on some events, like not more often than like 4 times a second, or not more often than once a second. So the user will type, and then after 1 second, we will use the value and do the query. What we're going to do here is we want to run this query only when we press on the search button to make sure that our query, we are not sending a bunch of queries whenever we type something here. How we're gonna achieve that? The problem with at the moment is that we are using the use query. I mean, it's not a problem, but in order to be able to run a query based on some user events, then instead of using a use query, we should use a use lazy query. Use lazy query. The difference between a use query and a lazy query is that the query will run when the component mounts. So basically when the component mounts, it will run, and if a variable change, like it will basically always run when the variables change. A lazy query, use lazy query, will define the query, but it will not run it. It will wait until you tell it to run. And the return value of a lazy query is a bit different. So we have to destructure from an array, and that array on the first position, we have the function that we should call when we want to run the query. So the function in our case, it's going to be called, how did I call it? Run query. And in the second position of our array is our data loading and error parameters. So it's a bit different, but you can see we kind of keep the same structure. It's kind of a combination between a mutation and a query, because the mutation will return here in the first position of the array the function that runs the mutation. And yeah, like with a lazy query, that's the same. So now our query will not run by default. And if I write something here, it will not run because it's a lazy query. And to run it, we need to call this run query. I'm also gonna remove the variables from here, because the variables will be defined when we want to run the query, not when we want to define the query, because the variables will always change. So let's go ahead in our button, and let's add the onPress event here. The onPress is going to be a function that should execute something. What should we execute? We should execute this run query function. And here we have the same options that we defined in our lazy query here. So what we can do in the run query here is we can provide variables q, and the value is going to be the search. So now if I'm gonna do React Native and then search, then it's gonna load and we're gonna see the results. Now if I'm gonna delete until React and then search, it's gonna load and then it's gonna show us. Now I think it's a much better experience, and our queries are actually optimized, and we are not running queries that we do not need, basically. And with that being said, I think this task with input box is done. So for the input box, we have created the search state. The search state is managed by our text input, and using the text input we can write here what we want to search. Then we have a button that will execute the query when we press on it, and to do that we had to switch from a use query to a use lazy query. In short, a use query runs when the component mounts. A use lazy query defines the query, but it doesn't run automatically. We should call the function that will execute the query. So yeah, with that, we are done with the input box and with the search. Let me go ahead and add everything. Let's say input box. or search input box. Input box. Okay. How is it going, guys, for you? How are you managing? Do you have everything that we have at the moment? Let me know in the live chat or in the comments under the video. Because our next step is going to be to actually add 2 tabs for our books, for the Google Books and for the Open Library, that will allow us to view the search results from both Google Books and the Open Library. At the moment, these results are all from the Google Library. And yeah, we need to basically add 2 tabs here on the top where we will be able to switch from one to another. So also here under our header, this is our header, below it, but also before the loading state, let's add a new view for our tabs. So the style here will be styles.tabs. In the tabs, we are going to simply have 2 text boxes. One of them is going to say Google, Google Books. And another text box is going to be Open Library. Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and add some styles for these tabs. Tabs here. And we want to render them in the same row. So for that, the flex direction is going to be a row. And how we want to manage the space between this item with the justify content, we want space around them in order for the items, yeah, like to have like the same space around them. So for the tabs, I want also to increase a bit the height to 50 to have more space, and also to align the items or align items in the center to center them vertically. Yeah, hopefully vertically. Step 11 throws arrow can find variable GraphQL. Make sure to import GraphQL from Apollo client, and also if you have imported GraphQL from Apollo client, make sure that you installed GraphQL when we installed Apollo, because here in step 10, not in step 10, in step 9, when we install, we don't install only Apollo client but also GraphQL. So pay attention to this, install it, and then import it. You should see it in the package.json as GraphQL. I don't see it. Why I don't see it? Oh, it's GraphQL here. GraphQL. Okay, back to what we are working on right now. So we have our tabs. Now we need a way how to switch between the tabs. I want to be able to click on the Google Books and it will show me the Google Books, and when I click on the Open Library to show me results from the Open Library. So for that, let's go ahead and use a state variable, because a state variable will determine on what tab we are at the moment. So the provider, we're going to call it provider. Set provider is going to be a use state. And initially, let's initialize it with Google Book Search. And I'm gonna name them exactly how the fields are called here in the GraphQL. So I copy Google Search from there, and I will put it as the default value for our provider. Now, the next step is for TypeScript. So if you do not have, if you're not very comfortable with TypeScript, you can ignore this. But if you want to specify what values can our provider be, we will send here as a generic type to the use state with angle brackets. We're gonna say that this provider can either be Google Book Search or it can be Open Library Search. Only these two fields are accepted in this provider. And this way we will make sure that we do not set like some random names there that we do not have. Now, based on the state variable, let's give some visual feedback on the screen in the UI to show which one is the selected tab. So where we have a text box here for the Google Books and Open Library, let's give a style that is going to be conditional. The condition will be if our provider is equal to the Google Book Search, then we want the styles to be this. We want font weight bold, for example, and also we want the font color. What color did I say? I don't know, royal blue. Royal blue. And after that, we will provide an empty style array. So this is the syntax. The style will depend if this is the selected provider. If it is the selected provider, then the font weight will be bold and the color will be royal blue. Royal blue, why doesn't work? Oh, I missed the L, royal blue. And let's do the same for the Open Library. Let's copy the style, let's put it to the Open Library, but the condition now is going to be open if it's equal to Open Library. We will not be able to switch there because we didn't implement the onPress event, but let's go ahead and do that. So on the text, let's attach an onPress event. When we press on this text, what we want to do is we want to set this as the default, as the provider. So set provider with the Google Book Search. And the same thing for the second text tab, but here we want to set the provider with Open Library Search. Now that we have this one, we can switch from one to another like this. I don't know why it has like that background when we click on it. I was not expecting that, but I think it's from my settings that I have to show the interactions. And just like that, we can move from Google Books to the Open Library. But that's not everything that we need. Another thing that we will need is the way we are accessing the data. Our data contains information both about the Open Library Search and about the Google Book Search. If we look here, as you can see, our data has two fields, Google Book Search and Open Library Search. So, depending on the provider that we have there, that's how we have to take the items. So, if provider is equal to Google Book Search, then we're gonna take it from the Google Book Search.items. Otherwise, we're gonna take it from data dot open library search dot docs, as you can see. So open library search dot docs. And at the end we can say, if none of this worked, then just simply put an empty array there. So look at this syntax and let's recap. We will send to the flat list data depending on what tab we have currently selected. If the tab currently selected is the Google Book Search, we're going to take the items by accessing data.googlebooksearch.items. Otherwise, we're going to take it from data.openlibrarysearch.docs. Docs because this is how their API is returning the data for us. Okay, if I'm going to go to the Google Books, everything should work as expected. If I'm going to do React Native search, it should work okay. But if I'm going to move to Open Library, we should see some errors. And the errors are happening because of the way we are parsing a book in our application. At the moment, we're parsing it specifically from Google based on the structure that Google is giving us. What we have to do is to parse it depending on the provider that we are getting the item from. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to extract this logic into a function here called parse book. This function will receive an item from the API and it will return a book. I can say it even like this. It will return a book. So how this parsing will work? Well, if the provider is our Google Search API, then we already know how to parse it. Return, because we parsed it here. So this is our book. So let's return this here. Otherwise, if the provider is not Google Book Search, that means that the provider is from the Open Library Search. So otherwise, let's simply return. We need to return image. We need to return title. We need to return offers. And we need to return ISBN. For that title, if we look here in the open libraries, the title is simply title. So we are going to take item.title. For the offers, it's going to be item.offers. Item.offer name. It's actually not offers. ISBN, it's going to be item.isbn at position 0, also safely. And lastly, it's about the image. And the image is a bit tricky. And yeah, let's cover the image in a moment. Let's just see if everything is working so far. For this item, I don't know the type, so I'm going to provide any. And let's go ahead and use this parse book in our flat list where we are trying to send the book here. So the book will be parse book using the item. Now if I'm going to do React Native search, Google Books is working as it was working before. Open Library, it's also working as it was working before. I mean, it's working because before it was not working. The problem at the moment is that it doesn't show images. And the way that I found how images work is just by going to Open Library, opening one of these books, and then checking the URL of this book. So open image in a new tab. No, actually not. That's not the way. Don't remember, but I found a URL that we can create based on the cover edition key. So in the open library, every book has this cover edition key. This is null, this is null, this is null. But this cover edition key is an ID like this. The URL that I found looks something like this. Covers Open API, where just by providing this cover edition key as a parameter somewhere here, I'm gonna show you where. If we open, then we see the image. So this is the structure. I hope that I provided it for you here. Where is it? Oh, yes, here it is. So for the image, let's go ahead and take this URL. And put it here. So this is the URL, this is the cover edition key, and just doing that, we have images for the books that have images, because as you can see, not all of them have images. So here we have our flat list, our list of books, both from Open Library and from the Google Books. I'm gonna do here React.js search. That's gonna update both here, React.js by example, and here for the React.js, and so on. And I think that with that, we are actually are we done? I think so. Yes, we're doing that. We're parsing the book. Yes. With that feature, we are done with our tabs for multiple data sources. I'm gonna go ahead and add everything. Tabs for Google Books and Open Library. Okay, here we have it. And the next step for us is to handle MyBooks. Okay, keeping track of MyBooks is gonna be interesting because I want to be able to save the books that are interesting for me and the books that I want to read. So by searching them, I want to have a button here that will add them to a list. And for example, if I'm gonna go to MyBooks, I want to see all the books that I have saved. How is it going for you guys? One wrong semicolon and lost the live track. Yes, the video is going to be published, so don't worry. You can take it on your own pace. Follow along as you see fit, but make sure to complete it by then, because it's not a very complicated project, but it will give you an overview of a lot of tools and technologies that you can use to build your mobile application. We are using here a lot of new stuff like Apollo, like StepZen, like Google API, Open Library API, and yeah, excited about that. And I hope you are enjoying it so far. We still have one more feature to go with, and this will include working with React contexts and also working with Async Storage. So if you're interested in that, make sure to stay till the end to learn about these two topics. Hello, Daniel. So when we deploy, does the application run on StepZen? When we deploy StepZen, yeah, like our GraphQL API is gonna run on the StepZen, but the data, it's gonna take it from the APIs that we connected it with. So our application will connect to the StepZen API, and then StepZen will get this information from Google API, from Open Library, and will merge it together and give it to our application in one go. And besides that, it does a lot of optimization to make sure that our queries are optimal, and a lot of stuff behind the scenes that improves the performance of our GraphQL API. Or do we just use the local setup for StepZen? No, the local setup is just for testing, but we can publish our endpoint. And in the free account, you have 2 endpoints for free to publish. So basically 2 APIs that you can publish. So deployed app hits StepZen API, nothing to do with our local. Yes, exactly. And let me actually check that. Like, I'm gonna stop my local execution of our API. Yeah, if I'm gonna go to the local host, it's not there. This site can be reached. But if I'm gonna refresh my application, let me refresh it from here. That's a very good question. Thank you for asking. So if I'm gonna do React search, then it's still working because we didn't connect with a local version of our API. In our app.tsx, if you look at the URL, we actually connected to the deployed version of our API. So this one will always be running, waiting for your request to come. And we needed our local instance in order to be able to work with this graphical interface. But this is not the only way you can work with your backend. You can, in a production scenario, I don't recommend working a lot with a graphical. I would rather recommend you to work with Insomnia or Postman. When I was working, I'm not sure if Postman has very good support for GraphQL, but Insomnia is great. So basically, you create your queries in Insomnia, you document your queries, you play around, you explore basically what you're doing here. And to do that, you can basically connect directly to your host here from Insomnia without having to run always locally. Okay, I'm gonna close it now because as we see, we do not need it at the moment. Any other questions so far before we move to the next step? When will GitHub repo be available? I'm gonna post it right after we finish this live stream. Real dev, keep on, man. Thank you very much. Working, everything fine. Back to the live session. Yes, let's go. Can see, long time no see. How are you doing, brother? Working. Okay, guys. So, I recommend moving on. We are in our guide at step 17. As you can see here from the table of contents, we are almost at the end. We have to work with MyBooks. So for MyBooks here, what I want to do is, give me 1 second. So The thing with MyBooks is that this is a state that we will need to use in multiple places of our application. For example, in the tab 2, I want to render all of the books that I saved. In tab 1, I want to check if one of the books that we see here in the list is a book that we have saved. And as you can see right away, we have two separate screens that depend on the same data. So working with normal state is not an option because we need this state more globally available so that we can access it from multiple screens. One easy way to do that without getting into a heavy global state management system is using the React Context API, and this is a perfectly fine solution for such use cases. So let's have a look at how we can use the React Context API to manage the global state in our application. And in this specific case, we're going to manage the saved books that we have. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder in our root folder here in the application called context. Context. And here the file is going to be called how did I call it? How did I call it in order to be consistent? MyBooks provider. Okay, so let's call it MyBooks provider.tsx. Okay, so in the MyBooks provider, what do we want to do here? Well, first of all, let's import a function called create. I forgot how it is called, but it's from React, and it's called create context, I think. Create context, yes. Using this function, we're going to be able to create our context, and the context will be called MyBooks context equal create context, and here we need to provide the value. The value of a context will usually is an object with multiple fields for different values that we want to expose to our application. Now, when we create a context, we need to wrap our, let's say we need to wrap our whole application with the myContext.provider in order for the components within our application to have access to this context. So what we're going to do, we instead of actually going here and wrapping it into the context provider, I'm going to do a little trick here. I'm going to define a component here called MyBooks provider. This component will receive some children and it will render, it will render the provider from my context provider, and this provider also needs the value. Value is the actual value that we will expose to the outside. When we create the context, this is the default one. Here is the actual value. At the moment, it's an empty object. Later on, we're going to add a couple of data here. And then inside our provider, if, as I was saying before, the component that needs access to this context should be inside the provider. So we're going to render the children here. And let's first export default MyBooks provider, this component. Let's use it, and after that I'm gonna tell you like how this children works. Now let's go in our app.tsx. We are going to import my books provider from context my books provider, and we're gonna wrap our navigation inside the my books provider like this. Now, as you can see, because we wrapped our navigation component inside my books provider, this navigation component is the child of our provider component. The same way as we can receive props here, the same way this information is sent to our component as a prop with the specific name children. Children is everything inside our component. So our navigation is passed to the children component and is rendered inside our books context provider. That means that all the screens inside our navigation now will have access to our MyBooks context provider. And here, let's say test equal A, right? What we can do to check can find variable props. Yeah, because I should remove it from here. It was just to explain. Now, to double check if we actually have access to this context provider, let's go ahead in one of our screens and see how we can use, how we can consume a context. So in the tab 2 screen, let's go here. In the tab 2 screen, I'm gonna remove actually these things to have it clean. And what I'm gonna need here, I'm gonna need two things. I'm gonna need the use context hook from React, and also I'm gonna need the actual context that we created here that we want to use. So for that, we're gonna have to export this books context, and back in our tab 2 screen, we need to import my books context from my books provider. Make sure to destructure it this way. And now inside the body of our function, we can go ahead and say context equal use context my books context. And just by having that, we can go ahead and console log our context. And what we will see, if I go to tab 2, we see test A. So usually what you do, you don't take the whole context, but you destructure exactly the value that you want. For example, test. And if I console log test, we see, and if I go to the tab 2, we see that the test is A. And if I'm gonna go to the book provider here, and I'm gonna say hello, and if I'm gonna go to the tab 2, the value is hello. So this is how we define a context using the create context function from React. Then we need to wrap our screens or our components that depend on this context within the context provider. This one is the context provider. The context provider will specify the actual value that we want to share with the application, and using a React trick, like it's not a trick, it's a feature how it works. By passing here children and rendering them inside the children, we were able to simply render the MyBooks provider here, wrap our navigation inside it, and now all our screens have access to these values. How do we get access to them? Well, for that we have a use context hook from React. We import the actual context that we created using create context. We put them together like this, and we have access to the data that it shares. Now, I want to show you a little trick of how we can simplify. It's a simple thing, but it helps tremendously to work with context providers. The problem here is that we will always have to import these two things, use context and the MyBooks context, when we will need something from there. Look, in the MyBooks provider, MyBooks provider, I'm going to export a const, a custom hook called use my books. This hook is going to be a function that, when called, will call the use context from React. Basically, it will do the same thing as we did here. Use context, MyBooks context. So what we did is we created a custom hook, use MyBooks, that simply called the use context with the MyBook context. Now I don't have to export my actual context from here. We will not need it because we will get access to it using the use MyBooks. And then in the app.test, not in the app, in the tab 2, we can simply call use MyBooks like this. And we don't need the use context from React, and we don't need the books context. We simply need one hook and we get access to them. And it should work as it was working before. Hello. Perfect. So now we have a basic structure of our context that we can easily wrap our application with, and also that we can easily consume using a custom hook like this. This is a bit more advanced, but I hope you you get the point, like why we have all of this and why we need it, all this boilerplate. Like we actually don't need it, but it will make it a bit easier for us to consume them. So in the next step, we're gonna have to implement the actual data that MyBooks context provider will hold. And here we have a question from Daniel. Vadim, will you ever make a discount for your course? The discount for the course we had only 1 year ago when I launched the course. When I announced pre-launch the course, we had a discount. But after that, I tend not to do discounts for the course because by doing that, you lower the value of the things that you have spent 1.5 years building, and you put all your time into this course. So that's why I usually don't do discounts, but that's a very good question from Daniel, because we are preparing something exciting for the Black Fridays for our premium course. So if you wanted to join our course for some time, wait a couple of days until we get to Black Friday, and we're gonna have something exciting for you at that moment. Not gonna say what, but you can probably guess. I'm gonna leave you here with that information. Daniel, does that answer your question? So, okay. So what data will we need to store into the context? We need an array of books that we have saved. So for that, we will need a state variable, const. Know what? Let me, before going into that, I'm really bothered by the red squiggly line here because we didn't specify the types. If you are new to TypeScript and you don't have to do this, but if you have experience and know what we're doing here, we simply have to define the type for our props, and our props will contain the children property that is of type. Let's import the type from here, React Node. And let's use it here like this, React Node, props equal. And now we can specify here props. And children will be defined as a React node. Okay, so back to what I started doing. We need to define a state variable for the books that we have saved. So const saved books and set saved books is equal to a use state. Initially it's going to be an empty array, but we would like also to define the type of this state, and we want to say that this is going to be an array of books like this. Perfect. Then instead of exposing the set saved books to the outside world like this, and allowing anyone in the application to call this function and mess it up completely, because it can completely override everything, it would be better to provide helper functions, either add book that will receive a book here, add book that will receive a book here, and we will do what? We will say set saved books with the existing books. Basically, we put the book before all the books that we already have there. And now we can simply expose this function, add book, for example. And this is much safer because this function, we know like what this function does, and whenever we will call this add book, we know that it will not delete anything, it will simply add one book on top of the rest. So if I go now to the tab 1 screen, and in the tab 1 screen, yeah, in the guide that I have prepared, I wanted now to show you like a bit more step by step how to do it, but let's actually implement most of the logic that we have here in the MyBooks provider, and then we can move on to using it. So instead of adding a book, I would rather have a function that will basically toggle if a book is saved or not, because I want to call the same function both when I want to save a book and when I want to unsave a book. So that's why the method is going to be called toggle on toggle save, and we're going to give here the book. What should happen here? Well, if the book is already saved, then we want to remove it because we want to unsave. Otherwise, we want to add it. So for that, we're going to need a new function called isBookSaved, and we're going to receive here a book, and we need to return true or false depending on whether the book is saved or not. How we're going to check it? Well, we can say return saved books. We will use a JavaScript method sum that expects a comparator function and will return true when at least one of these items fulfill the condition. So if some of these books saved book, if one of these saved book is equal to the book that we are searching, then we are good. Then the book is saved. It is in the saved book array. Here we need the arrow. Like this. The only issue is that by checking this this way, it's gonna work in some cases, but in some cases it's not gonna work because we are checking objects, and the objects are checked by reference. So if we query the same book the second time, it's going to be saved with a new reference, and comparing it with the book that we saved previously, it's going to say that it's false even though the value is the same. So in order to save to check to compare an object, not based on the reference, but based on the value itself, a trick that we can do is we can use json.stringify. Basically, take this object, make it as a string, take the other object, make it as a string, and compare the strings. Because if the strings, if the object in the string form is equal to another object in the string form, that means that the values are the same, and we can consider the books are the same. We could also work with ISBN or some IDs. That would also work, and in some cases I think it will work even better. But for now, this is good. So let's move on to our on toggle save. As I said here, we need to check if the book is saved, book saved, the book that we received, if it's saved, then we need to remove from saved. Otherwise, we need to add to saved. Adding to saved, we already did that in this operation. So let's do it here in the else statement. But removing from saved, we're also going to use the set saved books. We're going to get the books here. And what we're going to do with them? Well, we're going to remove using the filter mechanism from the array. So from the books that we already have in the state, we're going to filter the ones that are not this one, basically. So filter. Filter where saved book saved book where they're not equal. So I should do this check, but opposite, where they are not equal. And because I'm using this logic in two places, I can probably create a function for this. Are books the same? And we are going to receive A, which is a book, and B, which is a book. And we can return here this JSON stringify with A and B. And then we can simply, instead of doing this, we can simply call are books the same, the saved book with the book from there. And here, instead of checking it like this, we are gonna do are books the same, saved book and the book that we are searching. But we want to reverse it because we want to filter everyone that are not the same as the one that we want to remove. Okay, now let's go ahead and try to export our functions. For example, the function here in the value that we want to export is the on toggle save, and the function is called isBookSaved. These are two functions that we need at the moment, and probably the actual saved books data, because we will need them to render it in on the page that we want to show the books that we saved. Okay, I see here an error book with capital B. Wait a second. Okay. Yeah. And now if we would properly follow TypeScript rules, we would need to provide a type for our context here. to specify, to properly type, like our context. So the type, we can define my books context type is equal. So what are the values that we want to export? On toggle save is book saved in books. So let's put them here. And on toggle save, this is a function that will receive a book and will return a boolean, true or false. Is book save, this is a function that will receive a book. No, the is book save will return a boolean, but on toggle save will not return anything, so that's a void. And saved books, this is a simple array of books, so book array. Now we can send our type that we defined as a generic here. And as we can see, we need to specify the default values here for our fields. So for the on toggle save, we're gonna do an empty function. We're gonna do the same with the is book saved as an empty function, because by default, like, they will not do anything when they are initialized, and later on when we define them here in the component, they will have a proper value. Is book save should return a boolean, so we're gonna return false, and save books is an empty array, just like that. All right, perfect. Now let's go ahead and consume the values that we export here. One of them is the on toggle save. So for that, if we're looking to here, we already encapsulated in the app.tsx our MyBooks provider. Yes, in the step 19, we can use MyBooks context. Let's go in the book item component. Let's go in the components, book item component. And from here, what we're gonna do is we will need some functions, right? And a button. There is an error in the tab 2. We are consuming, I think, tab 2 screen. We're consuming this test that we do not have. I'm gonna remove and I'm gonna go back to my book item here. So in my book item, we will need to check if this book that we are trying to render is saved or not, using the use MyBooks. And also we're gonna need to toggle the save function. Basically, if we're gonna press on the button that we want to save, we will want to call this function. Now we need to display a pressable. The pressable is going to be our button that we see here. So we can copy it from here and let's add it inside the content container below the offers. So here I'm gonna put this pressable. We need to make sure to import pressable from React Native. We need to make sure to save. This is a property that we will get by calling is book saved and by passing the book that we are checking right now, the book that we are rendering right now. Okay, save this here on toggle save, on toggle saved. It's on toggle save. I think it's everywhere on toggle saved. So I'm gonna go ahead and change it to on toggle saved because it's not too late yet. In the MyBooks provider, I'm gonna simply change everywhere from on toggle saved to on toggle saved. And here as well. Okay, like this. Back into our book item. What else do we need? That's everything. We need also some styles. styles for our button. Come on. For our button and for our button text as well, button text. Okay, let me see. For the styles, I don't have them in the guide, but I'm gonna add them right after I finish the this stream. And I'm gonna paste these styles here. So for the button, we have to import the colors from our constant colors. Constant colors. And yeah, like our button has a background color. It has some properties to properly align it in the component, and our button text is simply white. So now if I'm gonna look for React Native, and if I'm gonna press search, then we should see this button want to read under every book item, because we are rendering this pressable here. Now let's try to press on the want to read. If I press on the want to read, by pressing on this button, we are calling the onToggleSaved function. Now let's recap and let's follow the data flow. We are calling the onToggleSaved with the data about the book that we are rendering, learning React Native, this one. Back in our provider, our onToggleSaved is this function. So what is it doing? It first checks if a book is already saved. Let's go in the is already saved. Because we don't have any saved books at the moment, basically none of them will be equal to this one. So this is going to be false, which means that we're going to go in the else statement and we're going to add in the saved books our book before all the other books that we have there. Now, if I want to add the second one, I will press on the second one. It's going to follow the same flow. It's going to see that there is no book in our saved books equal to this one, and it's going to add it before the other saved books. And if I'm going to press on the remove here, we see that from our book item, we call the same onToggleSaved book. But as you saw, because our saved is false, the label is remove and the background color is light gray. Okay, let's follow the onPress event when the book is saved. We go to the books provider, onToggleSaved will check if the book is saved. We'll see that some, specifically one of that book, is equal to the book that we are searching. That means that this is true, and we're going to try to remove it. To remove it, we simply loop through all of the saved books and filter out the one that we are trying to remove. And just like this, we can add and remove from our want to read list. Okay, that's good. The next step, yes, that's perfect. The next step is to actually render MyBooks inside the tab 2 screen. So in tab 2 screen, we already imported the use MyBooks hook. So we can do equal use MyBooks. And from here we can get, if you look in the MyBooks provider, we are exporting the saved books property. So let's get it here, and we can start by console logging, console log saved books. Now if we look in the console log, if I go to the tab 2, we see an array of books that we saved. The last step is to put them together into a flat list by passing there within the data. We passed the saved books, and in the render item, we're gonna get the item and we're gonna render a book item. And because this is already parsed, we can simply send the item here without having to parse. Because in the global state management, we are saving actual book items that we already parsed. Book item like this, and also make sure to remove align items and justify content from our container. And just like that, and also I think we will add a padding 10 here. And just like that, we have our books here in the tab 2. And if I go to the tab 1 and add more books here, and if I go to the tab 2, they are right away there without us having to update it. Because this is our global state data that is shared between different screens and different parts of application. And the same if from MyBooks, I'm gonna go ahead and remove some items. If I'm gonna come back, I'm gonna see that they are removed from this list as well. And also, as you can see, the books that we are adding last, for example, this one by Roy Dirks. Roy, hello. It's added as the most recently added book here in my tabs. Awesome. So, if I'm not mistaken, we are done with the MyBooks context. So, I think we can remove a console log from here. Do we have any other console logs? No. That means that we can say git add, git commit, MyBooks context. Okay. But the problem will be when you close the application and you open it again. I'm gonna try to do that using a refresh. So when you refresh the application and you go to the tab 2, then you will not see any books, because every time we refresh the application, MyBooks provider will initialize the state of the saved books with an empty array. So we're gonna have to start adding our books again to see them in the second tab. That's not how an actual application works, because what we want to do is we want to save this data somewhere so that the next time we open the application, it's gonna be there. For that, we're gonna use Async Storage, and Async Storage is a way to write data from our application to the device storage. It's locally on device, is data that is written locally on device. It is persisted between opening the application multiple times, like different times. So you can close the application, open it again, and it's gonna have the same data. However, it is not persisted when you uninstall the application or between different devices. So for example, if you uninstall the application and clear all the data for the application, then you're gonna lose all of this data, and the next time you install the application again, the Async Storage will be clean. This is something to keep in mind, because that's how Async Storage works. You write data to the phone storage. If you remove application, that data is lost. But it gives us the possibility to persist data for the application between like opening the application on the phone. Hope that makes sense. So yeah, for this use case, I think this approach will work for us quite well. So we're gonna get started by first installing Async Storage in our application. To do that, let's use npx expo install. Let's go here and install it in the application. The Async Storage has a pretty simple API. I don't have the URL here. Let me add a to-do list to add the URL. But yeah, as I said, like it has a very simple API. There are basically two methods that we can call. set item that will write something to the async storage, and get item that will read something from async storage. Okay, so let's start by importing async storage after it is installed correctly. In our books provider, let's import async storage. Should I destructure it? No, it should be like this. So import async storage from React Native Async Storage /async storage. Okay. Now let's go ahead in our MyBooks provider component and define two methods. One of them is, let me check how I called them. One of them is persist data that we will call when we will want to write data to the local storage. And let's also define a function for loading the data. We will call this function when we will want to read the data, read data from the local storage. So persisting data, what we have to do is, as I said, we will call the async storage.set item, and because this is a async operation, we're gonna do, come on, we're gonna do a wait. Yeah, we need to make this function async because they will both use a wait syntax. So await async storage dot, when persisting data, we need to call the set item function. The set item expects two properties. First one is the key, like how do we want to identify the piece of information that we are writing to the storage. So I can say books data, and we will know that by reading and writing based on this key, we're gonna get the data that we are working with. And for the value, we need to provide a value in the string format that we want to write. So if we are going to provide hello world, this is going to be the string that we write to the async storage. What we want to do is to write our array of books. The problem is that it's not a string, it's an array. But we already saw how easy it is to transform an array to a string by using json.stringify. And we're gonna say saved books. So we are transforming from an array to a string using JSON stringify, and we are writing it to async storage using the books data key. Okay, that's the first step. Now reading from data from the local storage. Well, we're gonna read it also in a string, so data string is going to be equal to await async storage, and here we're gonna use the second object, the second function from async storage called get item. Get item expects only one property, and it's the key that we want to read. We want to read the books data. Now we should check if data string exists, we want to parse it, because it will not. It doesn't mean that sometimes this data string will be null or undefined, and this is when you first open the application. There is nothing in the async storage yet, so that's why we need to check if it's defined. So our items, we're gonna have to transform from a string to a proper array. To do that, we're gonna use JSON parse, which is the inverse of JSON stringify here, and we're gonna parse our data string. Now, if everything is successful, we will set saved books in our state as items. Okay, so we have two functions. One that will persist data, one that will read data from the async storage. The next step is to call this function. So when do we want to call this function? We want to load the data when the component just mounts. When the application opens, right away, the first thing that we want to do is we want to load the data. So when we want to execute some logic when the component mounts, we're going to use the use effect hook, and inside our MyBooks provider, somewhere on top here, I like to keep the use effects on top. Let's do use effect. This is going to be the function that we will call, and the dependency array will be an empty array because we want to call this effect only when the function firstly mounts. What we're gonna do here, we want to load the data. We want to load the data. Load the data when the component mounts. Okay, loading the data is clear. We want to load the data when we open the application. When do we want to save the data? There are multiple strategies that you can take here. You can save the data every minute. You can save the data when you close the application. But I think saving the data is not that expensive in this context. So we can simply save the data every time it changes. So for that, in the dependency array, we can put the saved books property. And this use effect now will be called every time persist data every time it changes. Every time it changes. So what we will want to do is we want to persist data. Let's give it a try and let's see if it's gonna work. So here in React Native, let's search. I'm gonna save this book and this book. And if I look here, we have two books. If I'm gonna refresh, and if I'm gonna go to tab 2, we see them here. That's good, it means that it works, but let me try to refresh it one more time. And if I'm gonna go to the tab 2, well, it's still here. I don't know why that happened. I was expecting that the second time it was not here. Okay, let me explain because this might actually happen. One problem that might happen is that we might call persist data before we load the data. And if we call persist data before we load the data, we will basically lose everything because persist data will take the books from the state, which is an empty array, and it will simply write it there. And we will override all the saved items. So we don't want that. So for that reason, we want to persist the data only if we are sure that we first loaded the data. So for that, we're gonna have another state variable here called loaded, set loaded. Initially, this loaded is going to be false. Again, we want to persist the data only if it's loaded, persist data. Now, when we read books in the load data, at the end of this function, let's set loaded to true to allow our application to write data in order not to override anything. So with this system now, we are sure that we're not going to write anything to Async Storage before we read and make sure that we have most up-to-date data. Now, if I'm going to do React Native again, will it show me that the books are read? Yes, they are shown as that they are read. And if I remove, go back here, it disappears. If I refresh, go to the tab 2, it's not there. Yes, let's go. We are almost at the end because we finished with persisting data and we tested it and it works as we expected. Let's go ahead and do git add. git commit persist data with async storage. Amazing. So what you use for network call? What do I use for network call? I'm using Apollo client to query the GraphQL API. And last thing that I wanted to do before we end this live stream is to actually refactor a bit, to clean up a bit, and show you how we can do that. To make sure that, yeah, like now everything is working as we expect, but there are some small things that I think can be done a bit better or can look a bit better. So refactoring, let's start with changing the tab bar titles and icons. So for that, let's close everything. And instead of having tab 1, tab 2 at the top and so on, let's go ahead and properly change the icons and the names. For that, we're going to go into the navigation, in the index, and we're going to scroll down to the bottom tab navigator. We're going to start by changing the name of the tab 1 here to what? To search. I will also remove the title from here. I will also remove a header right. So if you highlight this one, you'll see that it goes all the way till here, because this header right is this question model. I don't need it. If you need it, you can leave it and adjust the how it works, but I don't need it, so I'm gonna remove. Now what we have? We are left with search, tab bar icon, and for the icon, instead of code, I want to provide the search here. And right away we see the tab here, search, and at the top we see the title, search. Let's do the same with the second one. And for the tab 2, I'm gonna say MyBooks. Title, I will remove title because if you don't have a title, it will take the name. So I'm okay with the name, MyBooks. And for the tab bar icons, I'm gonna say book. Okay, for the initial route name, this is where we specify what tab do we want to initialize with. We can say tab 1, but we can say search, but I think it will be better if we initialize with MyBooks. What do you say? To initialize it on the MyBooks there. For the options here, we see that we don't need the navigation anymore, and we can drastically simplify this syntax to look more like the second one here for the options, where we simply have an object with a tab bar icon. So let's go ahead and remove this part to have like only 2 curly brackets on the first line, and remove a bracket here to have 2 curly brackets here. Now it looks much better, but we still have some squiggly lines. The squiggly lines here are coming from the types that we defined for our bottom tab navigator. And the types are root tab param list, that if we scroll up, we see that they are imported from the types, this folder, types, in the root folder. If I scroll down, we see root tab param list, which is tab 1 and tab 2. We move away from tab 1 and tab 2. We need search and we need MyBooks. And because it's a space, I'm gonna put them in a string like this. Now, if I'm gonna go back here, the error with search and MyBooks should disappear. Yes. And if I'm gonna do search 1, now it appears because search 1 is not defined there. Only search is defined. Perfect. That's good. This is the first step to actually adjust this one. Now let's go ahead and in the screens as well. I don't like that our screens are called tab 1 screen. It makes it a bit more harder to navigate the project. So let's go ahead and rename it to the search screen.tsx. When it asks us to update imports, let's say yes. If it didn't ask, we need to make sure that in the navigation index here, we are importing from the search screen here. Screens, search screen. Let's do the same for the tab 2, and this is going to be MyBooks screen. This is only the name of the files, but we're going to go inside the search screen, and instead of tab 1 screen where we have export default function, again let's do search screen. That's good. And in the MyBooks screen as well, from the tab 2, MyBooks screen. Save. Now in the navigation, it was updated for me how it imported, but the name of a component remained the same. So I'm gonna simply copy from here, search screen, paste it here, MyBooks screen from here, paste it here. Scroll down where I see the red line, and here I need the search screen, and here I need the MyBooks screen. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Now MyBooks search. Okay. Another thing I wanted to show you how we can hide the top bar, the title bar, the header from one of our screens. Because in the MyBooks, I think it looks good with a header, but in the search, I don't think we actually need this header. It's up to you if you want to delete it or not, but if you want, let me show you how we can do it. First of all, in the navigation index, we need to find the, we need to find our screen that we want to hide the header. So this is our screen, the search in the bottom tab. Now, if we pass in the options as a separate parameter here, header shown false, then our header disappears. Yes, it included a new issue that the content is below the notch, and this is the benefit of using a header, because the header will automatically handle properly the notch and the safe area view. If we don't have a header, we will have to manage the safe area view ourselves. So going into our screen, search screen, let's go ahead and import from React Native safe area context. We're going to import the safe area view. Safe area view. This component is aware of the notches, is aware of the bottom notches and the top notch, and will display content only in the area that is safe, basically outside the notch. So to use it, we can simply replace our top view with a safe area view. Scroll down and make sure that where we close it, it's the same safe area view. And right away we see that it is displayed properly. I don't like the background color, but we can adjust that by setting to the container the background color white. And now everything is white. And at the top, I really like how it looks. It looks good. But at the bottom, we have a necessary space here. And this unnecessary space here is because safe area view tries to add some padding because it thinks that it touches the bottom notch here, this one from iOS. To say, we can say to the safe area view that we want to only handle the top edge. The bottom one we can ignore because we know that on the bottom we have this navigation. So now it properly displays at the top without a title bar, and at the bottom as well. And I think, yeah, that's everything that I wanted to show you how to yeah, how to refactor. Also from the MyBooks screen here. No, MyBooks screen is a very small component. Everything is fine. In the search screen, we have a lot of things. For example, we have this query. Then we have a lot of functions that are not properly here. What I want to do is we can, because we have multiple, we will need multiple files for the same screen. I want to extract the query in a separate file. And because we are going to have multiple files for the same screen, instead of having the screen as a component like this, let me go ahead and create a folder for it. So the search screen is going to be a folder, and our search screen component is going to be inside this folder. Move. Update imports, yes. If it didn't ask, make sure that in the navigation, it is imported from the search screen, So now in the search screen folder, as I said, I want to export the query from here because it's not very advisable to have both queries with the React logic, with a rendering logic in the same place. So for that, in the search screen, let me do queries.ts, and let's bring our query there. Query. We will need to import GraphQL here, and we will need to add export const query. And I'm not gonna call it query, I'm gonna call it search query, because later on maybe we will have our queries here as well. So let's be more specific. Back in our search screen, we deleted the query from here, but we need to import the search query from this directory queries. Now let's make sure to use it in our lazy query like this to be able to query React Native. If I search, it's still here. Perfect. But now our file doesn't need anymore this one, doesn't need the use query. What else it doesn't need? Well, it's okay. Another thing, I would actually extract this parse book in a separate function because it's not about the search screen. It's when you think about the responsibility of a search screen, it shouldn't include parsing a book. Parsing a book is something else. So we can have like a separate folder for our services, and one of the service can be books, book service.ts, and in the book service.ts, let's define this parse book like this. Parsing a book will receive an item, and because we don't have access to the provider anymore, we're going to say that provider is here. Provider is here. Let's now export this function, parsing the book. That's it. Back in our search screen, let's import parse book from services book service. Now where we call the parse book, where do we call it? We need to check, because we need to send there one more parameter. It's not simply parse book, but it's parse book of item and then the provider. It needs to know how to parse it. Look, another thing is that now in the book service, we didn't specify what is the type of this provider. And we can specify that it's a string, but as you remember, we said that it's better to specify exactly what providers do we have in this way. So we could go ahead and copy, paste the type here. It's gonna work, but every time we copy paste, that means that maybe we should define it once and use it multiple times. So I'm thinking that we can extract this type in our book.ts as a type provider. Book provider can be either Google Book Search or Open Library Search. Now having this global book provider, we can use it both in our book service like this and in our search screen like this. Now our search screen is a bit less, it's 100 lines of code. If you want to take your refactoring to a next level, I also recommend to extract styles outside of your component. So for example, these styles can be extracted to styles.ts file in the search screen, and we can take this object styles, we can paste it here. We need to make sure to import the style sheet, and we're going to import it from React Native. Style sheet from React Native. And instead of defining the variable, I'm going to do export default styles, because there will be no other export, so that's why I'm exporting as default. And now in the search screen, we can go ahead and import styles from this directory styles. And now we don't need the style sheet here. And just like that, our component is already 75 lines of code. You can go ahead and separate it into smaller components. For example, these tabs can be a separate component that are responsible for Google Books and Open Library. I'm gonna stop here. I'm not gonna go further into refactoring. I just gave you an idea of how you can do it and take it from here and improve and refactor other screens as well if they need. So git add, git commit -m, refactor, and yeah, that's everything that I wanted to show today. So guys, here in the guide, I also provided some challenges for you that you can implement in this application, because I always say, take it to the next step. Don't stop here. Yes, I'm limited by time because I'm doing it live. I need to be fast, I need to be concise, and I need to make sure that I'm able to do it like in 3 to 4 hours. But you have multiple days. You can work on this application more if your goal is to learn. If your goal is to learn, then the best way you're gonna be able to learn is if you're gonna get out of a plan. If you're gonna follow this tutorial and at one point say, okay, but can I do that as well? Can I add that feature as well? Maybe I can implement something extra. And when you're gonna try to do that, like whenever you are curious about how something can be done, challenge yourself and try to implement it yourself. See how you would implement it. Maybe it's not gonna, you're gonna fail, but at some point you're gonna definitely manage to build it. And at that point, it's gonna click in your mind and you're gonna say, oh, that's why we need, I don't know, that thing in order not to go there. I don't know. You're gonna find solutions, and your mental model of how to build application will evolve and will become stronger. So with that being said, I highly encourage you to follow and to continue this project with extra features. Some of the ideas that I prepared for you is adding multiple shelves for my books. For example, at this moment, I'm saving the books in one single shelf, want to read, and all of them are here. But maybe once they are in the want to read, instead of removing, maybe I want to say that I already read it. I'm not sharing the screen. So as I was saying, whenever you add a book here, want to read, it is added to MyBooks here. and then we just keep track of them. But what if we can have multiple shelves? One of them can be want to read, one of them can be currently reading, another one can be already read. To do that, what you have to do, I'm gonna give you some advice. What you have to do is inside our MyBooks provider context, the simplest way you can achieve this is by having another state variable here. Instead of saved books, currently reading. And the same here with a set. And then go ahead and implement the logic of moving books from saved to currently reading. Also make sure to persist it whenever we load the application. Not only the books data, but also the currently reading books data. This is one way. Another way would be to actually save shelves. Instead of saving an array of books, you can save an array of shelves. That's a bit more challenging, but it's also possible. Another idea that I recommend you is adding custom shelves that user can add and manage. For example, if I want to have a shelf only with technical books and another one with business books, try to implement this functionality. And to implement this functionality, the data structure that you're going to have here should be having an array of shelves, and every shelf has an array of books. Okay. Another quite important feature that you can add is the details page of a book and show more information about them. For example, if I press on this book, open a new page and display more information about that book. Display the description, the long description, the number of pages. Maybe display some buttons of how you can buy it from Amazon. Maybe you can build an application that has these Amazon buttons that you can link to your affiliate URL and distribute such an application, and people, whenever they are pressing on buy on Amazon, they will buy it using your affiliate URL. This is right away here a business idea that you can implement. Another idea is to merge books from different APIs in the same list. So when we are searching for a book, maybe a good idea would be not to have two tabs here, but to have one single list of the merged books, and somewhere, if necessary, display like the source. Is it coming from Google Books? Is it coming from Open Library? Maybe you don't need that at all. Ratings, you can display ratings. The Google API and Open Library, I'm not sure, but Google API has ratings information, so you can display that. And I highly encourage you to look into the API and see what data is there, because based on the data, sometimes you come up with ideas. Oh, there is a data prop that shows me the number of pages. Let me add it in the UI. Maybe this is important for users that are searching for a book. The next feature that you can implement is some gamification. And when I talk about the gamification, is just some statistics like how many books have you read this month or this year? Maybe add a reading challenge where I can set that I want to read this year 24 books. And when I go to the MyBooks, I see a progress bar that shows how far ahead I am in the challenge. For more advanced features, you can take this build to a next level and add an authentication layer to let people create an account, because as I said, at the moment, everything works with Async Storage. And if I uninstall this application, if I close it and open it again, everything is going to be fine. Let me show you that. If I go to the Expo Go, yeah, like everything is going to be fine and it's going to be saved. But if I'm going to delete this application completely, then I'm going to lose the data. So if you want to fix that issue, then you're going to have to probably add an authentication layer and also a database layer that will store information about the user shelves, user books in the cloud. with our current architecture, with StepZen in the middle, you can achieve that pretty easily. Because if you remember from our diagram, at the moment we're getting data from the Google Books API, from the open library, but later we can add, for example, maybe GraphQL you don't need, but an SQL backend and connect it to the StepZen. So this is going to be the third data source that will store this data not locally on the device, but somewhere in a database there. And StepZen has supports a lot of SQL, like MySQL, PostgreSQL databases, and also NoSQL databases as well, like MongoDB, DynamoDB, if I'm not mistaken, and other NoSQL databases. Okay, so these are the features. If you have any other ideas, please let me know. And if you build them, and if you decide to share them on social media, tag me, and I want to see where you will take this application from here. Shall we go into some Q&A? Let's see, guys. Drop your questions here, and we can spend some time with a Q&A. And if everything is clear, we can get started with the weekend. Did I commit everything? While you're writing the questions, no, yeah, let me. I'm gonna I wanted to publish the GitHub link, but I'm gonna do it after we finish the live stream. Can I know what topics of JavaScript are necessary to move towards React Native? I'd say basic JavaScript skills are required, like basically fundamentals, like how to declare a variable, what is a if statement, what is a loop statement, and all of this stuff. Then I recommend also to learn a little bit of modern JavaScript features, because without them, a lot of things will look weird and magic when it comes to React Native and React.js. Here I'm talking about like destructuring, spreading, conditionals, async await, array methods, because we are using a lot like this syntax. So for example, if you don't know what is array destructuring, then this syntax will look very weird to you. Like, what's this array here? Like, why do we have, yeah, like, why do we have an array here? Do we define an array? What's happening? So I highly recommend learning these basics like destructuring, spreading, and so on, because as I said, we are using a lot of them, and without knowing them, like, it's gonna be confusing. It's gonna be like, what's this syntax? Do I need to know OOP for React Native, and are React.js and React Native same? No, you don't need to know OOP for React Native, because React Native is using JavaScript, and JavaScript is a functional programming language, it's not object-oriented. Even though we can write object-oriented programming in JavaScript, like by default, by design, this is a functional programming language. And are React.js and React Native same? No, they're not the same. React.js is the UI library. React.js is a library. It's a UI library that helps us render things on the screen. So if you follow today's tutorial, like, yeah, let me go into, for example, into a component. Like rendering stuff on the screen. For example, this part is what React.js gives us the possibility. Using hooks, using lifecycle methods, using use effect and stuff like that. This is React.js. And in React Native, we are using React.js because we depend on it to render our UI. But the difference between React.js and React Native is that with React.js, you build web applications. With React Native, you build mobile applications. So React Native is using React.js for rendering side. And the major differences from React Native is that we are rendering different components. In React.js, you would work with web components, with web elements like a div, a span, an EMG with a, and so on. Here we are working with components imported from React Native, or components that we define. So these are components that are mapped to native side. So for example, image is mapped to an image on Android and to an image on iOS, and it knows how to render it natively. So this is the major differences. So after learning these JS topics, one can move towards React Native and no need to learn React.js. Yes, I would say so. I don't see React.js as a prerequisite to React Native. You can learn React Native, like you can learn all of this stuff by learning React Native. This is what I did, and I had a great experience. I first learned React Native, and then I went to React.js. If you have React.js experience, yes, it is going to be easier for you to learn React Native. Does that make sense? So if you're just starting, for you it doesn't matter if you go with React.js or React Native. But if you already have React.js experience, it's going to be easier because a lot of things will make sense for you, and a lot of things we are reusing from React.js, like state, props, rendering, and so on. Yeah, Amplify at this moment, if I'm not mistaken, does not support OTP. Simply signing up with the one-time password without providing your normal password is not possible. What is possible is multi-factor authentication, where you provide both your password and the one-time password that you receive. Can you use Firebase authentication in any of your tutorials? Maybe. I learned React Native without knowing React.js. Yes, that's perfectly fine. I see a lot of people that are getting started with React Native. Guys, I recommend you check out the builds and tutorials that we have on this channel. These are a very good resource, and even though I might sound biased, but we have managed to help thousands of users out there get started with React Native without having any experience. So all of our projects are exciting projects that in 2 or 3 hours you have a working application in your hand, and by doing that you learn a lot of concepts. All of our projects are specifically designed to target some areas of development. So if you do a couple of them, you're gonna get a very vast knowledge of how you can build mobile applications. This is a very good starting point if you are just getting started with React Native. Then everything on the YouTube channel, all the projects that we have, will be helpful to you to get started and get moving with this. Then if you will feel more confident with React Native and you will know the fundamentals, you'll know the basics, and if you are serious about this and you want to take it to a next level, then we have our premium course for that at academy.notjust.dev. So yeah, that course is a very intensive course. It has more than 40 hours of content and it goes into depth. Like here on YouTube, we sometimes skip over some features, sometimes we take some shortcuts because we don't have the amount of time that we can have in a premium course. But in the premium course, we actually handle all of this, and in that course, you learn how to build full stack mobile applications from zero to market. My voice is already cracking, as you can see. But what I wanted to say is that next week during Black Fridays, we're planning a campaign. We're going to have a discount for the course. So make sure to stay tuned until next week on Friday. Also next week, we have our hackathon. We have our hackathon for everyone who wants to build application themselves or who wants to challenge themselves to see if they can build an application. So everyone is invited. We're going to have daily workshops to help you get started, to help you move along. It's completely free. And also you can win some prizes from our sponsors. And the prizes are quite good. Like you can win $500, free projects will win $500, and free projects will win $250 for the application. So yeah, super excited about next week. We have been planning and preparing for it for quite a while, and we already have a lot of people registered. So I think it's gonna be exciting. We're gonna see some interesting projects. So let's see a couple of more questions and we can wrap up. Okay, there are a couple of them. Thank you so much for your precious time. Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's the thing that I'm always looking forward to during the week. I wish it was Friday to go live stream and build. How do you refresh when you switch tabs? What do you mean? Is it for the application here? If you're asking about the application that we are building, we are not actually refreshing. When we do the search, we do the search for both Google and both Open Library. And when we switch, we do not refresh. We just take the data that we need from the query. Let's see. Thank you so much for all your efforts. I have started learning React Native and it is very interesting because of you. I appreciate that. I really do. And good luck. It's really an exciting journey with that will open a lot of doors. Like the React Native developers are doing great out there. Which managed backend architecture is best as per your opinion? Oh, hard question. It really depends from use case to use case. I use a lot AWS Amplify. You should start a React Native course from basic to advanced, covering each topic individually. Exactly. That's why we have academy.notjust.dev, which is a course from basic to advanced. The course is actually split into two parts. One of them is fundamentals that will teach you everything that I explained that you need, like fundamentals of React Native, how to render things, how to optimize things, how to build beautiful user interfaces. And the second part of the course is an actual real world application that you're going to build, both front end, back end, deploying it, setting up a CI/CD pipeline that will automatically build your application, implement notification system, feed and following system. Like that application is crazy. Like take it, adjust a bit the style, the designs, and publish it and start your business with it. That's how I see it. It's that production ready. All right, guys. So I think we can wrap up today's live stream. What I wanted to say at the end, I wanted to say thank you very much, StepZen, for sponsoring this video and for helping us reach more people and teach this exciting stuff to you guys. If you also enjoyed, make sure to show them some love. Sign up, use them. You saw how easy it is to build a GraphQL API using StepZen. And whenever we are building startups and applications, speed is the most important stuff. And whenever people are asking me, like, how do you manage to build application in a couple of days? I attribute most of that to the tools that I'm using, because the tools should speed you up instead of slowing you down. So StepZen in this situation managed to speed up a lot today's build, and in only 15 minutes we had a backend API up and running with StepZen that we built in 15 minutes. Amazing, isn't it? So yeah, thank you very much, StepZen. Guys, if you enjoyed this tutorial, again, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, share it with your network. We're trying to reach as many developers as possible and help them advance in their careers as software developers. So thank you very much for sticking till the end. Let me know in the comments what other projects you'd like me to build, and I'm gonna see you next Friday. And next Friday is the hackathon. Bye.